It started with a sound, a low metallic rumble that cut through the early morning quiet like a bad omen. I'd been up since 500 a.m., sipping my first cup of coffee on the back deck like I did every day. Retired life had its rhythms, and mine had always been about routine, especially after 22 years in the Army. Wake early, watch the woods, listen. That morning, I didn't hear birdsong. I heard tires, heavy-duty ones, grinding over the gravel maintenance road that curled behind the tree line. Not many people knew that road existed. It was a service path that ran along the border of the old nature preserve tucked behind our HOA-managed community, like some forgotten scar. Overgrown, unpaved, and officially closed to civilian use, according to the rusted signs still nailed to its entrance posts. I stood up slowly, cup in hand, and peered past the lattice railing of my deck. It was still dark, that odd blue-gray shade, just before sunrise when shadows take on a life of their own. Then I saw the headlights, 2 pairs of them bouncing slightly as they crawled up the incline from the preserve side. The vehicles emerged one after the other, big industrial trucks with open beds stacked high with logs. Fresh logs. Pine and oak still glistening from sap and morning dew, crammed together like stolen bodies in a getaway van. I counted the rings in one massive stump, just from where I stood. 30, maybe 40 years old. My jaw clenched. The trucks turned east and headed out toward the HOA maintenance shed near the main gate. I watched them disappear behind the tree line, leaving behind a plume of fine dust that caught the growing light. Something wasn't right. I set my mug down and walked inside, heart thrumming just beneath the surface. There were no official logging operations in that preserve. I knew because when I bought the house 2 years ago, I'd gone to town hall and read every line of the community's environmental covenant. That stretch of woods was classified as municipal green space under soft protection. It was public land preserved from development thanks to a zoning decision from the 80s after a long court battle led by local conservationists. And yet, here were trucks without markings, no forestry logos, no state permit placards hauling out lumber under cover of darkness. I didn't mention it to anyone that day. Not at first. I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it was debris cleanup from the windstorm last month. Maybe the HOA had a short-term contract with Parks and Rec that hadn't been posted yet. But that night I sat in the same spot on my deck and waited. The trucks came again. This time, 3 of them. Same route, same quiet operation, same stacks of timber. I timed them between 5:22 and 5:35 a.m. The next morning, I recorded a video on my phone, zoomed in as best I could through the patch of woods separating my property from the access road. The image was grainy in the low light, but clear enough to see what they were carrying and that no one was wearing any kind of uniform. That's when I knew. This wasn't cleanup, this wasn't sanctioned. This was theft. I started keeping a log, every truck, every morning. I even noted which direction they exited and how many workers I could glimpse in the cabs. They never wore reflective gear, never stopped. They were in and out in under 20 minutes. On the 4th morning, I drove to the town office to ask about it casually at first. I spoke to a junior clerk named Kelly, who scanned the current permits database and raised an eyebrow. No timber contracts filed for that preserve, she said. And if it's municipal land, they'd need an open bid approval from city council. That hasn't happened in over a decade. My gut twisted. I thanked her, but I didn't say more. Not yet. I didn't trust anyone. In this town, HOA politics ran deeper than party lines. There were rumors that the board president, Douglas Wexler, had friends in city zoning. That he donated heavily to the mayor's last campaign. That he could get permits fast-tracked or buried with a phone call. I didn't want to believe that. Not until I had more. The next morning, I went out early, real early. Parked my truck a few blocks north near the edge of the community walking trail, where it wouldn't look suspicious. I hiked through the tree line down into the preserve. My boots were soaked from dew by the time I found the clearing. And there it was. A logging operation. Small, crude, but active. The stumps were fresh, bark peeled back. Machinery tracks in the soft earth. And a large blue shipping container with a padlock and no markings. I crouched behind a deadfall and snapped as many photos as I could. One of the workers, young mid-20s, lit a cigarette while gassing up a chainsaw. Another pulled a tarp over a pile of logs. I zoomed in on a decal stuck to one of the chainsaws. It had a faint HOA asset sticker on it. My heart pounded. That was it. The connection. This wasn't some rogue outfit. The HOA was involved, and now I had proof. I slipped back to my truck without being seen. My palms were slick with sweat by the time I turned the key in the ignition. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the footage. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew what could happen if I went up against the board. They had lawyers, money, influence. But I had something else. Experience, discipline, and the kind of stubborn moral code that doesn't go away even after you hang up the uniform. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office and filed a report. And that was the moment everything changed. When I first moved into Hidden Pines, people told me I was lucky. Best kept secret in the county, my realtor beamed, pointing toward the woods, as if she were showing me beachfront property, all that nature right in your backyard. And it was beautiful at first. Towering oaks, thick-trunked pines, the occasional deer grazing in the early mist. The preserve spanned nearly 80 acres behind our subdivision, a quiet buffer from the outside world. I had come here after retiring, hoping to find some stillness. My wife had passed 2 years prior after a long battle with cancer. We had always talked about buying a little place in the woods somewhere she could paint and I could split firewood and mend things with my hands. She never got to see it. But I came anyway. And for a while it worked. I planted 2 rose bushes beneath the kitchen window and built a birdhouse from scratch. I took long walks in the mornings and drank my coffee in silence. There was something sacred about the forest, its hushed language, its unwillingness to explain itself. But no one else seemed to feel that way. In fact, it didn't take long for me to realize most of the neighbors barely acknowledged the woods at all. Conversations at the community center always circled back to HOA rules, paint colors, lawn heights, seasonal banners. When I asked about the preserve during a meeting, someone chuckled and said, "Oh, that old tangle of sticks, don't worry about it. Just mosquitoes and thorns." It felt wrong somehow, like everyone had agreed to ignore it. But ignoring something doesn't make it less real. As weeks passed, I noticed more signs that something was off. A section of trail near the northeast boundary was suddenly blocked by orange plastic fencing. HOA maintenance, do not enter the sign read, though. I'd walked that path dozens of times. No one at the monthly meetings ever mentioned it. Then the sound started. Not just the trucks, but the whine of machinery deeper in the woods. Not every day, just often enough to gnaw at my thoughts. A low metallic clatter followed by brief silence. Sometimes I'd hear voices shouting, then cut off. On one occasion, I swear I heard a tree fall. But every time I brought it up, I got the same look, that polite suburban squint that says, "Don't stir things up." I began asking around subtly at first. I chatted with Margaret, the widow across the street over her porch railing. "Oh, that road," she said, waving her hand vaguely toward the forest. "That's just where the HOA stores extra gravel and equipment. Been that way since I moved here 10 years ago." "Equipment for what?" She hesitated. "Oh, landscaping, drainage work." "They don't let us park there, though. HOA's pretty strict about vehicle storage." A week later, I brought it up to Paul, one of the newer residents, with a son on the high school football team. "I heard chainsaws back there the other day," I said. He stiffened. "Probably city workers. Clearing old limbs. Safety thing." I pushed just a little. "City says they haven't issued any work orders for the preserve in over a year." He didn't answer, just gave a tight smile and walked away. Something had taken root here. Not just in the soil, but in the air between people. A kind of fear, quiet and constant. I started paying closer attention at the HOA meetings. Douglas Wexler, the president, always stood tall at the front of the room, square-jawed and confident in his Navy sports coat and HOA-issued lapel pin. He spoke like a man who expected no questions. "Budget update maintenance fees will increase 2% next quarter. Landscaping improvements along the east path. The board has approved additional security patrols in response to last month's mailbox vandalism." No one asked about the preserve. One night I raised my hand. "What's happening behind the walking trail?" I asked, keeping my tone level. "I've heard heavy equipment in the woods. Trucks, chainsaws." Douglas didn't blink. "We've had to address storm debris and erosion issues, routine upkeep. Is that something the HOA has a permit for?" The room fell quiet. Douglas's smile faltered just briefly. "The HOA handles all required paperwork internally. If you have concerns, submit them through the proper request channel." I did, twice. No response. 2 days after my second request, a letter appeared on my doorstep. Not mailed, hand-delivered. HOA letterhead. Reminder. All outdoor structures must conform to design guidelines. Birdhouses with unapproved paint colors are subject to removal and fines. My birdhouse, pale blue, the same color as my late wife's favorite scarf. That was the moment it turned personal. I began digging deeper. I pulled property records from the county assessor's website. I looked up zoning maps, historic designations, conservation trust boundaries. And I found something that made my stomach knot. The preserve wasn't HOA property. It was public land owned by the county zoned for preservation and not under the HOA's jurisdiction, which meant, and the HOA had no right to manage it, no right to fence it, and absolutely no right to harvest a single tree from it. I printed the documents and slid them into a folder labeled "Just in Case." I started hiking deeper into the preserve, taking different paths, studying the terrain. I mapped out the machinery tracks with a compass and marked GPS waypoints on my phone. I noted where tire marks crossed over from the HOA access road into county land. I even used my old Army-issued rangefinder to estimate the log quantities being pulled each morning. It was organized, methodical, calculated, and silent. No one in the community dared speak of it. As if the woods were cursed. As if by pretending the trees weren't being torn down, they could convince themselves the world wasn't rotting around them. But I knew what rot looked like. I'd seen it in failed regimes, in corrupt operations in places where power choked truth like a weed. And this felt exactly the same. The HOA had crossed a line. Not just a legal one, but a moral one. And even if no one else would say it out loud, I knew that forest was worth fighting for. I waited until the monthly HOA meeting. Not the one with the folding chairs and donuts in the community center, but the closed-door session the board held in the private lounge of the clubhouse. Technically, homeowners could attend by request as long as they gave notice and didn't disrupt proceedings. So I gave notice. 3 days in advance, certified letter. They couldn't block me not without looking like they had something to hide. The clubhouse was half lit when I arrived, the kind of sterile, warm glow meant to feel inviting, but just made the place look like a funeral home for expired policies and tired lies. Douglas Wexler was already at the head of the oak conference table, flipping through a binder thick with budget printouts. Beside him sat Teresa Langley, HOA secretary, and 2 others I didn't recognize, newly elected, I guessed. They looked uncomfortable already. Mr. Rourke Douglas said, without standing, offering a half smile. Always a pleasure. To what do we owe your presence this evening? I have questions, I said, placing my leather folder gently on the table in front of me. About the preserve. He didn't flinch, not yet. But his eyes narrowed just enough to tell me he knew exactly what this was about. Teresa gave a tight-lipped smile. We've addressed trail maintenance already. I'm not here about trails. I'm here about the illegal logging operation behind our homes. That silenced the room. I opened the folder and laid out the first few photos tire tracks through soft dirt chainsaws marked with HOA asset tags, GPS coordinates printed beneath each time-stamped image. This was taken 3 mornings ago, this one yesterday. And here I tapped a map I'd printed from the county zoning office is the official boundary of the preserve, showing that these activities are happening on county land, not HOA property. Which means I added pausing to meet each of their eyes, "You're trespassing," or at least someone using HOA resources is. Douglas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smile gone. Those photographs could be anything. Anyone could have walked back there and taken a few snapshots. Maybe. But not everyone has video footage of your maintenance trucks leaving the woods with full loads of unmarked timber. His mouth twitched. I had him now. I've filed a report with the sheriff's department, I continued. And I've spoken to the county's environmental enforcement division. They'll be looking into it. You what? Douglas's voice rose a half octave, the calm veneer slipping. You heard me. I gave them everything. Dates, vehicle tags, even your quarterly expense report showing fuel costs tripling since April. You can't bury that with a memo. He slammed his binder shut. This is slander, Rourke, and harassment. You're dangerously close to violating HOA conduct rules. Are you threatening me with a fine because I reported a crime? I asked, stepping closer voice level. Because that's not just unethical, it's illegal. Teresa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at the 2 younger board members. They looked like deer caught in headlights. They hadn't signed up for this. No one ever thinks sitting on a Homeowners Association board means answering for criminal behavior. Douglas stood slow and deliberate, planting both hands on the table. "You're a guest here tonight," he said, voice low. "And you've made your point. Now I suggest you leave." "Not quite yet," I replied, sliding one last document across the table. It was a printed copy of the county's land use code with the section on protected public lands highlighted. Below it in bold, the penalties for unauthorized extraction of natural resources, including logging on municipal property. Maximum fine $250,000, imprisonment up to 5 years. Liability for restitution, full value of the damaged forest. Douglas didn't touch it. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice calm but unshakable. "If this doesn't stop, if I see even one more truck on that trail, I will take this to the media. I'll bring a drone. I'll park myself at the trailhead with a GoPro and live stream every illegal log that comes out of those woods. You won't just be dealing with code enforcement. You'll be front-page news." Silence. For a moment, I saw the brief flicker of fear behind his eyes. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew deep down that I was right. He just didn't expect someone like me to stand up. They never do. Douglas adjusted his tie, straightened his shoulders, and spoke with forced civility. "We'll review the matter internally. Thank you for your concern." I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just collected my folder and walked out, every footstep echoing through that polished marble floor like a drumbeat. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. A slight wind stirred the pine trees at the edge of the clubhouse lawn, as if even they were waiting. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes before starting it, fingers wrapped tight around the steering wheel. They weren't going to stop, not willingly, and something told me that night's confrontation wouldn't be the last. Sure enough, the retaliation came fast. 2 days later, I got a violation notice in the mail. Unauthorized external fixture birdhouse does not meet community aesthetic standards. I knew it was petty. I also knew it was deliberate. Then came the trash pickup incident, my bins left untouched, while every other neighbor's was emptied. Then a strange email from the HOA's treasurer saying they'd lost my last payment and I was now delinquent. My driveway was egged that weekend. Coincidence, maybe. But I'd spent enough of my life in systems built on intimidation to recognize its early tremors. What they didn't understand was that I'd already lived through worse. You don't survive the desert without learning how to stand your ground in the wind. This wasn't just about trees anymore. It was about power. About people who thought they could do whatever they wanted because no one dared call them out. But they'd picked the wrong man to push. I wasn't going away. And I wasn't afraid of the dark behind those woods. The forest always had a way of pulling me back in. It wasn't just the mystery anymore, it was instinct. When something doesn't make sense, you keep digging. You follow the tracks. You listen to what isn't being said. That's what the Army taught me, and the woods were whispering plenty. After my run-in with Douglas at the clubhouse, I knew he wouldn't stop. He was too arrogant, too practiced at lying with a smile. But I needed more than photos and assumptions. I needed to see it all for myself, every truckload, every machine, every man out there swinging a chainsaw on protected soil. That's how I ended up out in the preserve at 4:30 in the morning, crouched beneath the low sweep of a cedar tree, waiting for headlights. The sky was pitch black except for the scattered glimmer of stars, and the air carried that sharp, piney smell that reminded me of bivouacs in Germany. I'd parked a mile away this time and hiked in using night vision goggles I still had from my old search and rescue gear. They weren't standard issue anymore, but they worked well enough for woods like these. I moved slow and careful, stepping over logs, ducking branches, breath steady. At 4:57 a.m., I heard it. Low rumble. Tires cracking twigs. A distant diesel engine crawling uphill. I froze and dropped flat against the moss-covered ground, goggles focused on the break in the tree line where I'd seen the trucks pass before. Moments later, they emerged, 2 of them hauling what looked like full loads, already fresh-cut logs, stacked high under canvas tarps. No markings, no tags, no lights on the back. They drove slow, methodically, like they knew the path by heart. As they passed within 30 yards of my position, I switched my phone to silent mode and began recording. I zoomed in on the lead truck, catching a flash of the driver's face in the dim dashboard glow. Maybe late 40s, sunglasses on, even in the dark, a camo hat pulled low. Behind him, a second driver kept glancing back through his side mirror. like he was expecting trouble. They disappeared up the path heading east toward the maintenance shed. I waited another 10 minutes, then began tracking their point of origin. The trail they came from wasn't marked. No HOA signs, no warning tape, just a narrow gap in the underbrush, barely wide enough for a pickup. But the ground told a different story, deep ruts in the dirt-crushed vegetation and the unmistakable drag marks of logging chains. This was no casual trail. This was a supply line. I followed it, slowly staying low. My boots made almost no sound as I slipped deeper into the trees, letting instinct guide me. After about 15 minutes of moving through thick brush and uneven terrain, I found it. A clearing unnaturally geometric, maybe 200 feet across, with a muddy logging ramp leading down to a flat staging area. It was like a hidden world had opened up in the middle of the forest, and there, under the cover of a green military-style tarp, sat a portable sawmill. Stacks of logs surrounded it, some freshly cut, others already stripped and sectioned. A few had been loaded onto pallets, marked with shipping barcodes. Next to the sawmill sat a small prefab structure, one of those temporary offices you see on construction sites. Light leaked through its windows. Inside, silhouettes moved, at least 2 men, one smoking, one looking at a clipboard. That was when I noticed the generator, small gas-powered, tucked against the back of the trailer. Running silent. Probably only kicked on when they needed light or tools. I raised my phone and started taking more footage. Every angle. The sawmill, the logs, the shipping labels. Then I zoomed in on the license plate of a pickup parked nearby. Colorado plates, not local. I took still shots of everything. Suddenly a twig snapped. I froze. It wasn't me. Another snap closer, this time, about 10 yards to my left. Then a flashlight beam cut through the trees. "Hey, who's out there?" My blood turned to ice. I backed away slowly, staying low, heart pounding like a war drum. The flashlight beam swept across the trees but didn't land on me. The man holding it stepped forward, tall, wearing a reflective vest, but not one I recognized from any city or state forestry outfit. No insignia, just plain gray workwear. I slipped behind a fallen log and stayed there motionless, barely breathing. The man stood still for a few seconds, scanned the tree line, then turned back. "Probably a deer," he muttered. He walked off. I waited another full minute before crawling backward through the underbrush. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop moving. I made my way out of that clearing, back along the trail, retracing my steps to the trailhead where I'd stashed my pack. I didn't relax until I was back in my truck, doors locked, and halfway down County Road 12. I reviewed the footage 3 times that morning. It was better than I could have hoped. Not just video of the logging site, but audio of the machines, faces, plates, and that one perfect shot of a pallet with the HOA's internal asset code tagged on the wood. They weren't just cutting timber. They were processing it, packaging it, selling it. This wasn't lazy overreach. It was organized theft. A full-scale operation happening under the nose of the county and facilitated by the very people elected to beautify the community. I sent a package to the sheriff's department that afternoon, everything on a USB drive labeled clearly with a formal written report. I hand-delivered it to Deputy Karen Brewster, the only officer in the department I knew personally. We'd met through a community watch event last year. She was sharp, no nonsense. She flipped through the folder and let out a low whistle. "This is big," she said. "Real big." "You have no idea," I replied. "And it's only going to get worse if we don't shut it down now." She promised to escalate it to her captain. As I stepped back into my truck, I glanced at the tree line again. The forest had gone quiet, but I knew the real storm hadn't started yet. When I handed that flash drive to Deputy Brewster, I felt a strange sense of finality, as if the gears of justice had finally begun to turn. She looked me square in the eye when she took it, promised she'd bring it to her captain immediately. She even gave me her personal cell in case anything escalated. But then, nothing. No call, no knock on the door, no patrols near the preserve. Just the usual quiet hum of HOA perfection sprinklers hissing before dawn. The chirp of golf carts ferrying board members to early planning meetings, and the weekly newsletter in my mailbox, announcing exciting landscaping improvements that never seemed to materialize. For 3 days I waited. Then on the 4th morning, I sat on my deck again, coffee in hand, binoculars across my lap, and I saw the trucks. Same pattern, same timing, same 2 drivers, rolling out from that same hidden trail in the preserve like nothing had changed. I stared stunned. I had handed over undeniable proof to law enforcement, video photos, audio mapping, and they were still running the operation as if they'd already been cleared. No caution, no delay. Just bold business as usual. A knot of suspicion twisted in my gut. I dialed Deputy Brewster immediately. It rang twice before she answered. "Rourke, they're still hauling," I said without greeting. "Today. Right now. I'm watching them from my deck." She cursed softly under her breath. I passed everything along. My captain said it was being reviewed by the county prosecutor. These things take time. "How much time?" I asked. "This isn't a parking violation. It's organized theft on public land." "I agree," she said, "but they want to be thorough. Bureaucracy, you know." I didn't reply, because I did know, and I didn't like what it meant. "Look," she said, her voice lowering. "Off the record, if I were you, I'd stay alert. If they realize you're the one who blew the whistle, they already know I cut in. Trust me." A long pause. "I'll check in again," she promised, "but be careful and document everything." I hung up, stomach churning. It felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. That afternoon, as I returned from a grocery run, I noticed something unusual. My mailbox door was wide open, even though I hadn't collected any mail yet. Inside was nothing, just a note handwritten on cheap notebook paper. Some trees are better left alone. So are people. No signature, no envelope, just that. I didn't bother filing a report. I knew how that would go. No prints, no witnesses. Just more shrugs and vague warnings to stay out of HOA business. That night, I turned off all my interior lights and sat in the living room with the curtains cracked, watching the street. My Glock rested on the coffee table, unloaded but very visible. Old habits from deployments: stay calm, stay ready. You don't let fear run your house, but you don't ignore the rustle in the tall grass either. At 1:13 a.m., a car slowed in front of my home. Silver sedan, no plates, lights off. It rolled past my driveway, paused at the end of the cul-de-sac, and sat there for nearly 5 minutes, just idling. I watched from the shadows. No movement inside. Then, as quietly as it had come, it backed up, slowly turned, and drifted away down the street. Not a neighbor, not a visitor. Someone sending a message. The next morning, another letter appeared, this one official-looking on HOA letterhead. Notice of fine. Violation of aesthetic ordinance, non-compliant garden features. They'd attached a grainy photo of my rose bushes, the same ones I planted beneath my kitchen window the first spring I moved in. The ones she picked out before she passed. Bushes exceed maximum height by 4.5 inches. Fine $75, due in 7 days. Failure to comply may result in lien action. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so desperately transparent. This wasn't enforcement, it was harassment. They wanted me to break, to give up, to feel watched and powerless. But they didn't know me. The army didn't break me. Watching my wife fade didn't break me. This was just noise. So I leaned in. I replaced the batteries in my trail cameras and installed 2 new ones, one near the preserved trailhead and another pointed toward my mailbox. I updated my digital logs, sorted my evidence by category, and began contacting local journalists through burner email accounts. No bites at first, until I got a reply from a reporter named Lila Tran at the County Chronicle. Looks interesting. I've heard whispers of HOA corruption in Hidden Pines before. Want to talk? I called her from a park bench 20 minutes outside of town. We spoke for over an hour. She asked smart questions, wanted to verify sources, promised confidentiality. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Someone believed me. 2 days later, I woke up to find a sheriff's cruiser parked down the street. Same time, same position. Not patrolling, just sitting, watching. It stayed for 30 minutes. Then it left. And I realized something chilling. Either someone had pulled strings in the sheriff's department, or someone had pulled strings above the sheriff's department. The silence wasn't neglect. It was intentional. A waiting game. They thought they could run out the clock, that I'd lose steam, that I'd forget what I saw in those woods, what I heard in that clearing, that the weight of small fines and veiled threats would bury me before the truth had a chance to breathe. But they were wrong. Because the deeper the silence got, the louder my resolve became. They always start with the small things. Petty inconveniences, subtle humiliations, tactics meant to gnaw at the edges of your sanity until you start doubting yourself. The HOA may have wrapped itself in bylaws and flowery mission statements about community harmony, but behind that curtain, It was nothing more than a machine built to grind down resistance. The morning after the sheriff's cruiser incident, I found a bright orange notice stapled to my fence. Failure to comply with HOA directives will result in further action. No signature, no name. Just the HOA logo like a corporate stamp of divine authority. By then, I'd started keeping every piece of correspondence in a locked cabinet in my study, hard copies, scanned duplicates, cross-referenced by date. If they wanted a paper war, I'd give them a battlefield. But it didn't stop at letters. That week, my trash was skipped again. When I called the waste management company, the rep sounded confused. "Sir, it says here your service was temporarily suspended at the request of the property manager." "Property manager," I repeated. "I own my home." "Yes, but the request came from Hidden Pines HOA. They said you'd be out of town indefinitely." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The next day, my sprinkler heads were broken, every single one of them neatly snapped at the base. No tire tracks, no footprints, just damage. Clean and deliberate. When I walked the perimeter of my yard, I found cigarette butts near the back gate. I didn't smoke, and my neighbors weren't the kind of people who'd toss one over the fence. That night, the motion lights outside my garage flickered on at 2:07 a.m. No one was there when I checked. But the feeling lingered. Someone had been watching. The HOA newsletter arrived the following morning. The front page featured a smiling photo of Douglas Wexler shaking hands with the mayor beneath a headline that made my stomach turn. HOA partners with local businesses for Sustainable Landscaping Initiative. Sustainable. The same man, who was gutting a protected forest, had the gall to parade himself as an environmentalist. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it weren't so grotesque. That afternoon, I went to speak with my neighbor Margaret, the widow across the street. She'd always been kind to me, but when I mentioned the trucks, her face turned pale. "Douglas came by last week," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "He asked if anyone's been talking to you, said you were making trouble. I told him you were just concerned about the woods." "And what did he say?" Her lips tightened. "He said some people don't understand how communities work, that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for progress." I stared at her, the words sinking like lead. "Margaret, that's not progress. That's a crime." She didn't answer. Her eyes darted to the HOA patrol cart, slowly rolling past her driveway. Two board volunteers in matching green polos nodded as they went by. Watching. Listening. Margaret stepped back. "I think you should let it go, dear. Please." That was when I realized how deep the fear ran. This wasn't apathy. It was survival. People didn't stay silent because they didn't care. They stayed silent because they knew what happened to those who didn't. That night, I drove to the preserve again. I parked near the trailhead, where I'd placed one of my cameras. When I checked the feed, my stomach dropped. The camera was gone, cleanly removed. Even the mounting screws were missing. Whoever took it knew exactly where to look. I walked deeper into the woods, flashlight off, following the faint shimmer of moonlight filtering through the canopy. The forest felt different now, emptier somehow. Where there should have been the smell of sap and fresh pine, there was only the acrid tang of oil and exhaust. The ground near the clearing had been raked over erasing tracks. The sawmill was gone. In its place was a tarp-covered mound that looked like soil, but when I kicked at the edge, I saw the glint of metal. Buried equipment. They'd shut it down temporarily. Probably because someone had tipped them off that an investigation might be coming. I crouched down, pulled a small flag marker from my pocket, and stuck it in the ground beside the mound. If they moved it again, I'd know. On my way back, I noticed something else, reflectors, glinting on a new fence that hadn't been there before. It ran parallel to the trail, dividing a strip of land that, according to county records, still belonged to the preserve. A no trespassing sign hung crookedly from a post. In small print at the bottom corner, "Property of Hidden Pines, HOA." They were expanding, claiming county land as their own. I took photos, GPS coordinates, and voice memos documenting everything. Then I emailed the whole packet to Lila, the reporter. I didn't care if she printed my name now. Fear thrives in shadows. I was done living there. Her reply came an hour later. "Got it. Confirming with county records. This could be huge." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Someone outside the HOA web was finally seeing the threads. That night, I slept for the first time in days. But when I woke up the next morning, the smile died instantly. Every rose bush under my kitchen window gone. Uprooted, soil disturbed, petals scattered like blood across the mulch. A single note lay stuck to the trellis written in block letters. Final warning. My hands trembled not with fear, but rage. Those roses weren't just plants, they were memory. They were hers. They'd crossed a line they could never uncross. I walked into my study, opened the cabinet, and took out the second flash drive, the one I hadn't given Deputy Brewster. The one with everything I'd gathered since. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them one they couldn't bury. But first I needed backup, and I knew exactly who to call. My brother's old commanding officer, now head of the state's Environmental Enforcement Division. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when he answered and heard my name, his voice went steady and hard. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. By the time I hung up, he'd already promised an unannounced site inspection within 72 hours. The HOA had poked the wrong bear, and this time the forest wasn't the only thing watching. When I hung up that call, something in me shifted. It wasn't relief, not yet. But it was the first time since this whole mess began that I didn't feel alone in the fight. Captain Roland Avery, my late brother's old CO, wasn't just any state official. He was a bulldog, with a badge, the kind of man who took environmental crimes personally. He'd seen too many good forests disappear for profit, too many crooked land deals swept under the rug. When I told him what was happening here in Hidden Pines, he didn't hesitate. He said, "Give me 72 hours. We'll come quietly and we'll come hard." I believed him. Still, those next 3 days stretched like rubber bands across my nerves. I spent every waking hour organizing, cross-referencing, building a timeline so tight that even the most slippery prosecutor couldn't squeeze through it. I cataloged footage from my trail cams. Yes, one had been stolen, but the second camera survived hidden deeper in the brush beneath a hollowed log. It caught something shocking: a small convoy, 4 trucks loading timber under the cover of night just 2 days after I delivered the flash drive to the sheriff. They weren't slowing down, they were accelerating. I included that footage in the final report to Captain Avery. Along with a scanned copy of the false fence claim the HOA posted along the preserve line and the freshly taken photo of my uprooted rose bushes. But I didn't just rely on officials. I called Lila Tran again. "You wanted more?" I asked. "I've got more." We met at a diner 40 minutes outside town. I handed her a manila envelope with everything: dates, logs, photos, a map with every truck path marked in red. When she saw the stills of the buried sawmill equipment, her eyes widened. "They covered it." "Buried it," I said, "right under the forest floor, like a crime scene." "And you're sure the land's protected?" "Triple-checked. County record zoning laws and a conservation easement from 1987. They're logging on public land, laundering it through HOA equipment, and fencing it off like it's theirs." She exhaled slowly. This could win awards." "I don't want an award," I said. "I want them stopped." "You'll have that. I'll make sure this runs." We parted ways just after dusk, and I drove home under a sky threatening rain. A storm was coming, both literal and otherwise. The next morning it broke. The pounding at my door woke me just past 7:00 a.m. I opened it to find 3 men in gray utility uniforms standing on my porch with a clipboard and zero expression. "HOA maintenance," one of them said. "We've received a directive to inspect all exterior structures for violations." "I didn't request an inspection," I replied, arms crossed. "Doesn't matter," the leader said. "This is a mandatory compliance sweep. You'll receive a summary of infractions by end of day." They brushed past me, started photographing my siding, my gutters, even the bird bath she installed our second summer together. One of them knelt down, measured the distance between my garden gnome and the walkway. "Too close to the path," he muttered, scribbling something. I didn't stop them, let them document whatever they wanted. It was the last act of a cornered beast lashing out before the fall. And the fall came that afternoon. At 2:14 p.m., 2 black SUVs pulled into the Hidden Pines community, unmarked but not invisible. From my window, I watched 4 agents in windbreakers step out, state badges on their belts, clipboards in hand, determination in their stride. Captain Avery was the last to emerge, taller than I remembered, hair more gray, but that same intensity in his eyes. They didn't go to the clubhouse first, they went to the trailhead. I followed from a distance, keeping behind fences and brush, until I saw them enter the preserve. 2 carried handheld scanners. 1 carried a drone. Avery led the group straight to the clearing I'd flagged, pointing out GPS coordinates from the packet I sent him. Within minutes, the drone was airborne, circling above the treetops. 15 minutes after that, they found it. The sawmill tarp had been disturbed. Soil markings suggested someone tried to dig it out recently, probably to hide it elsewhere, but hadn't finished. One of the agents snapped on gloves, began pulling the canvas away. Beneath it, the evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Chains, axes, pallets marked for commercial freight. One still bore a partially torn sticker, HOA asset number 463. Avery's expression darkened. They took photos, logged coordinates, collected samples. Then they marched straight to the clubhouse. By the time I returned to the edge of the cul-de-sac, 2 sheriff's cruisers had joined the SUVs. Wexler stood outside in a suit and tie, looking every bit the cornered politician. His arms waved, mouth moving quickly, but Avery didn't flinch. One of the agents handed Wexler a sealed document. He read it face blanching, then turned sharply and stomped back inside. That evening, an emergency notice was sent to all HOA members. Due to unforeseen administrative matters, the HOA board will be suspended for the duration of an ongoing investigation. Maintenance and enforcement services will be temporarily paused, further updates pending. They were falling, and this was only the beginning. Lila published the first story the next morning. Front page, County Chronicle. Forest for sale, HOA accused of logging protected preserve for profit. It featured screenshots from my trail cam, quotes from zoning officials, a map showing every illegal expansion. The article named names, called out the board, quoted anonymous residents who said they were too afraid to speak. It ended with this line. One resident, who provided hundreds of hours of footage, documentation, and site maps, described the HOA's actions as the slow theft of a community's soul hidden under the guise of order. That was my line. I didn't ask for credit, but she gave it anyway. And suddenly the silence was gone. People began talking. Neighbors who hadn't looked me in the eye for months now walked over, quietly thanking me. Margaret left banana bread on my porch, no note needed. Even Paul from down the street, who once told me to drop it, stopped by and said, "You did good, man." But I wasn't done. The preserve still bore scars. And justice, real justice, was still being carved. But now I had momentum. And I had allies. And most importantly, I had proof that truth could still cut deeper than any blade. It happened at 6:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, just early enough to be unexpected, but late enough that most folks were either brewing coffee or walking their dogs. I was on my deck, again thermos in hand, watching the fog lift off the grass like a blanket peeled back from a sleeping world. The air was still. Too still. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Then I heard them. Engines, tires, radios crackling faintly in the distance. Not trucks this time. SUVs, cruisers. Official vehicles with tinted windows and black steel bumpers. They rolled in from both entrances of hidden pines like chess pieces, closing in on a king. By 6:48 a.m., there were 11 vehicles parked across the HOA's maintenance compound clubhouse and along the back gate near the preserve trail. Officers stepped out in uniform, state forestry, enforcement sheriff's deputies, even 2 agents from the State Department of Environmental Resources. Badges gleamed in the morning light. No guns drawn, but there was a silence in their posture, focused, practiced, final. Douglas Wexler was pulled from his front porch in slippers and a robe, arms crossed, as if that could stop what was coming. I watched it all unfold from the shadows of my porch, invisible behind the wall of pine I'd spent 2 years letting grow thick along my back fence. A bird chirped uncertain. Then came the battering ram. Not for Wexler's house, no. That came later. First, they hit the locked shed behind the HOA maintenance garage, the one supposedly used for seasonal tool storage. I knew better. I'd walked past it dozens of times, always padlocked, always watched by one of the more aggressive board volunteers. The moment the steel door gave way, the officers filed in with cameras and flashlights, and within minutes, they began carrying evidence out. Chainsaws, portable generators, commercial cutting permits falsified, a laptop, boxes of paper records labeled with cryptic codes like LP17 and Plans Q3. The entire neighborhood began to stir. Curtains parted, doors cracked open. People emerged in robed sweatpants, clutching dogs or mugs or phones, unsure whether they were watching a crime scene or a political takedown. Then the drone went up. It rose quickly, hovering over the preserve, followed by a forestry officer holding a tablet. His screen displayed live thermal imaging, and they used it to guide ground units to a new stash buried beneath the brush. A third stockpile of timber hidden under camouflage netting at the far south end of the preserve. The operation had been bigger than I'd thought. Not just one crew, one trail, one illegal sawmill. This had been a network. Multiple points of entry. Multiple stockpiles. Over 6 acres of affected land. By 8:00 a.m., the clubhouse had been locked and marked as an active investigation site. An emergency notice was nailed to the front door. Pursuant to Order Number 1482A, premises seized pending environmental and criminal investigation. No entry without authorization. I watched as one of the board members, Teresa Langley, always so prim and rehearsed, tried to talk her way into the building. She was met by a young agent with an expression like granite. "Ma'am, step back. But I need to retrieve confidential." "You'll retrieve nothing." She walked away without another word. I'll admit, a petty part of me relished it. After months of silence, deflection, and gaslighting, seeing them exposed, truly exposed, felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. But the deeper part of me, the one still scarred from what they'd done, knew this wasn't over. Because what they took wasn't just wood. They'd stolen trust. They'd stolen memory. And they'd tried to bury the cost under paperwork and fear. At 9:20 a.m., Captain Avery emerged from the preserve trail boots covered in mud, holding a sealed bag with a hard drive inside. He walked past the news vans now crowding the neighborhood entrance, ignoring the flurry of microphones. Straight to me. "You were right," he said simply. "Just wish I hadn't been," I replied. He nodded. "We'll have a full press release by tonight. Arrests are coming. We've got enough to charge multiple parties with environmental destruction, fraud, and conspiracy. Any chance they go federal." He didn't answer, but the look on his face told me everything. That evening, the headlines exploded. HOA under fire for timber theft. Hidden Pines Board implicated in multi-state lumber scheme. State raids, suburban HOA finds 3 illegal logging sites in protected forest. They thought no one would notice whistleblower exposes environmental crime in quiet community. Wexler was arrested that night. So were 2 other board members and a contractor from the so-called landscaping firm that had been laundering the processed wood through shell companies. The entire HOA board was dissolved pending litigation, and the state appointed an independent manager to oversee community functions in the interim. People flooded my inbox. Neighbors, reporters, old friends, even a few from out of state who'd heard my name on the radio. But none of them knew what it felt like to stand on my porch and watch those trees sway gently in the wind, untouched now, safe. Lila called just before midnight. "You'll want to see this," she said. She'd gotten her hands on an internal HOA email thread from 3 months earlier, leaked by an anonymous source. In it, Wexler had written, "No one goes into that forest. It's dead land. Might as well turn it into revenue. If anyone starts sniffing, we'll drown them in paperwork." I read it twice, then once more. He had known, and he had banked on the neighborhood staying silent. But I wasn't silent. I was watching, recording, remembering. They forgot the forest had witnesses, and one of them had teeth. In the days that followed the raid, Hidden Pines changed in ways I never imagined. The prim hedges and cookie-cutter lawns remained, but something invisible had cracked something deeper than siding and sidewalks. The air carried a silence no longer born of fear but of collective embarrassment, of people finally waking up to what had been festering beneath their feet. It was almost eerie the way the neighborhood slowed down. Garage doors no longer slammed with purpose. Golf carts disappeared. The HOA patrol cart sat abandoned in the community center parking lot, gathering pine needles. No more warnings. No more letters. No more smug committee volunteers photographing grass height like the CIA monitoring a nuclear facility. The HOA was dead, but the damage had already been done. The official state press release confirmed what many feared: the board had been orchestrating a multi-year operation to exploit timber from the protected preserve under the guise of landscape expansion. 3 logging sites had been active, all on county-owned forest land, with falsified boundary maps submitted in quarterly reports to justify the fencing. The total estimated value of timber stolen over $2.3 million. Ecological damage, irreparable to at least 6 acres. Criminal charges, 18 counts ranging from felony theft, environmental violation, conspiracy fraud, and obstruction. Douglas Wexler was denied bail. When the news hit national outlets, Hidden Pines became a cautionary tale. The HOA that stole a forest. CNN ran a segment. Local stations flooded the gates. Even YouTube was awash in commentary satire and reaction videos. But no one was talking about the families who'd lived under the board's thumb for years. No one spoke about the quiet ways control had wormed its way into people's homes. The way Margaret across the street was too afraid to hang her grandkids' art in the window. The way Paul had mowed his lawn twice a week just to avoid getting another citation. The way I'd once hesitated to build a small trellis because of an unapproved design aesthetic. That wasn't just bureaucracy, that was theft, too. They didn't just steal wood, they stole peace, autonomy, dignity. I kept remembering my wife's voice, the way she used to say, "Home isn't a place that tells you what you're allowed to love. It's where the things you love are safe just the way they are." The rose bushes came back. I replanted them quietly one morning, just as the light crept up through the mist. Same spot, same soil, same roots, as if nothing had ever been ripped out. Only now I dug deeper. I laid down thick layers of mulch, reinforced the trellis with new cedar, and mounted a camera inside the birdhouse disguised high-res motion-triggered. Not because I expected trouble, but because I'd learned that justice didn't always mean it stayed fixed. Sometimes justice was just not letting them do it again. Teresa Langley fled the state. Public records showed she sold her home at a loss and closed all her business accounts within 2 weeks. 2 other board members entered plea deals and began cooperating with prosecutors. One HOA contractor flipped almost immediately, providing the original invoices used to mask the timber sales through a fake landscaping budget labeled Storm Debris Recovery. I read every page of the indictment when it was released. One section struck me hardest. It documented a board meeting from the year prior, one I had not attended, where Wexler had said on record, "The forest isn't being used. Why let it rot when we can monetize it? We're a corporation, not a babysitting club." It was all there transcribed by the board secretary, admitted as evidence, entered into public record. That was the moment it became clear. They had never seen this place as a neighborhood. They saw it as an asset, a chessboard, a waiting bank account. And we were just tenants in their long con. But even in the ruins, there was something blooming. Lila's second article shifted the tone from outrage to reckoning. She interviewed several residents, including Margaret. In her quote, Margaret admitted, "We failed our neighbor. We let fear speak louder than truth. But he didn't give up, and now we won't either." For the first time since the raid, I cried. Not out of sadness, but because someone had finally said it out loud. A community isn't a place where you agree on mailbox colors. It's where you show up when it counts, where you draw lines in the dirt and say, "This far, no further." The county began the long process of rezoning the preserve. It would be reclassified as a restricted natural sanctuary, with full surveillance fencing and state oversight. Volunteers from our neighborhood, yes, volunteers, organized weekly restoration walks, clearing debris, cataloging damage, planting new growth where roots had been stolen. They asked me to join. I did. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because for the first time since I moved here, I didn't feel like an outsider scanning the tree line for threats. I felt like someone living in a place that had finally remembered its soul. Even the kids began exploring the forest again. With supervision, yes, but also with laughter. You could hear it echo through the canopy sometimes like wind chimes made of joy. There's still a scar. There always will be. The land remembers what was taken. But now it also remembers who stood up. The seasons changed slower that year. Or maybe I just noticed it more. The heat didn't sting the same way it had before. The leaves took longer to fall. The mornings carried a hush that wasn't fear anymore, but reverence, like the land itself was healing one soft breath at a time. It's strange how a place can hurt you and still be home. Even after all the headlines, the indictments, the town hall apologies. Hidden Pines didn't just go back to normal. Normal was gone. But in its place was something better. Accountability. People looked each other in the eye again. We said good morning without the undercurrent of HOA surveillance humming beneath our words. There were no more anonymous violation notices. No more backdoor deals under the cover of landscaping committees. The new interim HOA manager was a state appointee named Mia Castillo, mid-40s, sharp zero tolerance for nonsense. Her first act was to suspend all fines and open up the books. Her second was to propose a community review board. Her third was to knock on my door. She stood on my porch with a clipboard and a hesitant smile. "You're the one who started it, Mr. Rourke. We'd be honored if you joined the new board." I laughed. "Mia, I've had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime." But this time, she said, her smile deepening, "You'd be the watchdog, not the target." I didn't say yes, not then. But I agreed to attend the meetings. And something unexpected happened. I started to like them. They weren't about control anymore. They were about service, actual community service. Fixing the drainage problem on Willow Lane, helping Margaret get a ramp installed, organizing a tree planting day for the preserve. I didn't know most of my neighbors before the storm. Now I know them by name. Paul, the guy with the trimmed lawn and the bad poker face, turned out to be a damn good grill master. He hosted the first post-HOA cookout. No uniforms, no forms, just burgers, laughter, and stories. Margaret brought lemonade and apologized to me in person. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I just didn't want to believe it. You gave us the truth even when we didn't want to see it." I told her I didn't blame her, and I meant it. Because fear doesn't make people evil. It just makes them quiet. But the silence is over. The preserve is now protected by a county ordinance named after it. The Hidden Pines Woodland Act. Championed by the very prosecutor who once doubted my evidence. It designates the land as a zero-development zone, monitored by conservation authorities, and open only for guided hikes, education, and wildlife rehabilitation. Lila published a final piece 6 months after the raid. Not a scandal expose this time, but a tribute, a photo essay, titled simply, "The Man Who Wouldn't Look Away." She didn't send me a draft. I found it on my porch, folded neatly inside the County Chronicle. Page 1 held a picture of me standing next to the newly built trailhead sign, surrounded by kids planting saplings. Page 2 showed my wife's rose bushes replanted, blooming untouched. There wasn't a byline, just a dedication. For those who listen when the forest speaks. I don't cry easily, but I did that day. Not because it hurt, because it finally stopped hurting. Sometimes I still wake early habit I'll never lose. The deck is older now, a bit more creaky beneath my boots, but it holds steady. I watch the forest sway in the breeze, hear the squirrels chasing through the branches. I sip my coffee from the same battered thermos and let the quiet settle in. The good kind of quiet. The kind you fought for. The kind you earned. I never planned to be the guy who took on a homeowners association. I moved here for peace, for quiet, for trees and birds and a garden she would have loved. And for a long time I felt like that dream had been violated beyond repair. But dreams can be replanted. Like seeds, like roots waiting for rain. I walk the preserve trail now with the others retirees. Families, kids on bikes. We point out saplings, mark returning wildlife, and tell the story to anyone who asks. The story of how a neighborhood forgot itself, and how a few voices brought it back. There's one tree at the center of the preserve, an old oak that somehow survived the logging. They call it the Sentinel. We built a small bench beneath it carved from the remnants of one of the fallen stumps. On its back is a brass plaque. It reads, "In honor of the quiet ones who chose not to stay quiet." I visit it often, sit, listen, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with silence. And every now and then, when the wind moves just right, I swear I hear her voice through the leaves. Home isn't what they tell you it should be, it's what you fight to keep. She was right. This place is finally mine. And no board, no bully, no empire of paperwork will ever take it from me again.